It's not hippy-dippy, it's not wishy-washy. There is hard evidence, there is physiological and psychological hard evidence that shows that nature will improve mental health and well-being.
Hello, dear listener. Welcome back or welcome to Conversations in the Canopy, a podcast where we spend time exploring the lives, thoughts and pursuits of people invested in creating a better world for all living things. On today's episode, we have Dr Georgina Gould, a senior psychologist based in Richmond, who is going to tell us why we need a daily dose of nature. If you have a bit of an evidence-based mind like me, this episode will hopefully inspire you to embark on a journey into nature to benefit your mental health. And even without one of those evidence-based mindsets, all of the things you learn about today will inspire you to get out amongst the trees. Georgina works at the charity Dose of Nature and applies the up-and-coming research on nature therapy in her practice. We're going to learn why nature is good for us in both the psychological and physiological way. Learning all about fractals, alpha waves and phytoncides, those crucial little chemicals that do a world of good to our bodies. And they come from plants. We're going to see the importance of getting out from under a ceiling and getting yourself under a sky. I mean, take a peek out of that window and look at those clouds. Feel that sunlight. Listen to that rain. It is a beautiful world out there. And I'll forgive you if you ditch me now for a walk in the woods. It's good for you. So go and get out there. Ultimately, this episode demonstrates the need for a shift in thinking from the individual to the societal level. Nature therapy is standing up against the rhetoric of a long-developed quick-fix culture. I met up with Georgina in Pensford Field in the heart of Kew, a nature reserve surrounded by suburbia, and in the distance, the tall skyscrapers of London. It's a place with a lot of contrasts. We had bird songs in one ear and the occasional helicopter, plane and car horn in the other. Nonetheless, for people living in cities, spaces like these can sometimes be the only access to nature on their doorstep. So let's find out why we should get into these spaces, why we should venture out of that door and get underneath a canopy. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
Just tell us, where are we right now?
So we are in Pensford Field. It's a beautiful nature reserve in the heart of Kew, so quite close to Kew Gardens in London. And actually this is a lovely little spot that a lot of people, even residents in the street, don't really know about. So that's where we are at Dose of Nature. We have Pensford Field 3.5 days a week. And where you're sitting right now where we are, we're under the canopy of the trees, little kind of woodland area, and we can hear the birds, see the canopy of the trees, so it's a lovely morning.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It really is tucked away. I was walking up the other side of the street trying to look for the entrance. Yeah. And I think the locals were like, who is this guy?
We have to give our clients very specific directions to find us here, yes. But when they come, a lot of people just talk about how they feel instantly calmer and more relaxed, and it's a nice alternative, pleasant surprise from other NHS interventions that they may have visited and started.
Yeah, it's a beautiful hideaway. So tell us, who are you and what do you do here at Dose of Nature?
So I'm Georgina, I'm a psychologist, a counselling psychologist, and at Dose of Nature I lead on our initiative for young people, but also in many of our other kind of areas of work that we do at Dose of Nature. I joined Dose of Nature about 18 months ago. Prior to that, I'd worked in the NHS for many years. Spent quite a few years working in child and adolescent mental health services, which are CAMS teams, looking after children and young people and their families who were struggling with mental health difficulties. My colleague and friend, Dr Alison Greenwood, she set up this charity in 2019. And when she had enough money to employ another psychologist, she asked me to join her. And I haven't looked back. It's wonderful to work here. Yeah.
And so was there like a draw or an intention to go towards more natural therapies?
You know, it's interesting because I hadn't had that intention in my mind. But at the time that Alison asked me to join, I was on maternity leave from my NHS role. And I was on maternity leave during the lockdown period, that first lockdown. So I had my baby in May 2020. So we were right in the heart of the lockdown where you couldn't do anything. You couldn't really see anybody. You couldn't even walk with another person at that time. And I spent my entire maternity leave walking in nature. with my newborn baby. And maternity leave is and becoming a mother. I have another child, so it wasn't my first experience of motherhood, but new babies is a difficult time for a lot of mothers. And looking back, I think I was struggling with symptoms of postnatal depression, probably because I was quite isolated. But really walking in nature every day with my baby in the carry kind of thing that you take your baby in, really was my therapy, and it got me through lockdown. And so when Alison approached me to ask me to join her here at Dose of Nature, it just felt like the stars were aligned. It wasn't easy to leave CAMHS because I love working with children and young people, and I've got a real affiliation with the NHS, and supporting people who are supported by the NHS. But the idea of supporting this charity, Dose of Nature, and alternative therapy was incredibly appealing to me. And so that's why I left and joined.
So nature therapy, these alternative therapies, where did this all start?
Yeah, good question. Nature therapies have been around for a few years, probably more recently in the past sort of, I guess, 5 to 10 years. I think it's been gaining some momentum. Nature therapy as a concept isn't really out there, I would say, in mainstream mental health. I think most people will have had the experience that you go to your GP or you talk to somebody about the struggles that you're having with mental health and well-being, and people are signposted to traditional forms of therapy, CBT or psychotherapy or psychodynamic therapy, or to medication. So those are kind of the more traditional models. The idea that nature is good for well-being has really only been gaining momentum, I'd say, in the past sort of 10 years or so. And if you look at the history, the evolution, I guess, the birth of mental health, treatment, you need to go back a little while, go back to even the times when, Sigmund Freud, who was the founding father of psychoanalysis, so the first way that we started to treat mental illness, he was a psychiatrist, and he very much took a diagnosis and treatment approach to mental illnesses. So, for example, a patient would come with often a physical difficulty, the cause of which could not be found, and Freud would then link that, he would name it as being psychosomatic, and he would then, through the process of therapy, through the process of bringing up the repressed conflicts and traumas, by talking about things, those difficulties would emerge and be cured, as Freud would say. That's kind of progressed post-World War II. You had a lot of veterans who were returning from war, torn, from conflict, struggling with trauma. And there was recognised a need to respond to those veterans, and not just veterans, but women and children who had been obviously affected adversely by the war. So there was a real kind of drive and investment in trying to expand therapies for those people struggling with those difficulties. From there, psychologists, scientists started to look at kind of figuring out what people were struggling with. And what came about was that a very medical model of looking at mental health treatment was applied to mental health. So if you think about a medical model of diagnosis and treatment for physical health, for example, you would have somebody perhaps who comes feeling, low energy, and they might have a test that discovers that they're depleted in iron levels, and so they would be prescribed vitamins. That same principle can be applied to any other physical health difficulties. And essentially that same principle was then applied to mental health. So out of that was born the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Difficulties. That was brought about by the American Psychological Association. And there you have a list of mental disorders, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, post-traumatic stress syndrome, amongst many, many others. And that manual then specifies the best type of treatment for that difficulty. At the same time, a lot of money, pharmaceutical companies were investing a lot of money in gathering an evidence base, for medications to treat these mental illnesses. So then you have this, psychologist, this renowned psychologist, saying that this is how we need to treat mental illness. It's through diagnosis and these types of therapies. And you have pharmaceuticals gathering a huge amount of evidence that tells us that this is how we should treat depression. We should treat it with an SSRI, with an antidepressant. And that's very difficult to refute, isn't it? And of course, then the general public are then faced with those choices and hard evidence and being told that by doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, and probably, in all honesty, wanting and understandably wanting a quick fix for, the symptoms of depression or anxiety that they were thinking. I mean, how lovely if you were able to take a pill without any side effects and you don't feel low in mood or energy, you don't get panic attacks anymore, you don't get those horrible feelings of anxiety that makes us want to run away and hide. All of a sudden, okay, I just take this pill like I would take a vitamin and I will be okay. So that's kind of been why I guess we've treated mental illness with those traditional forms of intervention. But I would say that I would hope that there's a shift, I think, away or moving away from those more traditional models of intervention, because I think people are recognising that actually it doesn't always work and there are side effects and people don't always want to be on medication for the rest of their lives. And talking therapies absolutely have a place. I'm a psychologist. I believe that myself professionally and personally. But we have this natural world around us, which has, we now have gathered hard evidence that shows that this natural world is healing, that this natural world can have some of the same effects that psychological therapies and medication has, that actually the natural world can settle our anxiety, it can boost our mood, it can do some of the same things that medication does. So why aren't we using it? And I suppose what we want to do at Dose of Nature is to really spread that word, to support people to use nature for the positive benefits to the mental health and well-being, and to encourage others to do that as well.
And I can feel it just coming here. So I had to cross central London today and it felt fast, it felt quick, and I was trying to soothe myself with a podcast, like to calm down. And then I came here and now I've been sitting here for about 20 minutes and I feel so much calmer. But maybe I wouldn't have intended to come here because I would look for a coffee or something to make me feel better. And this is the way our society's kind of like made us desire this, as you say, this quick fix.
Yeah.
Yet nature's always been here. But I guess it's never had money invested in the research. So is there now a change? Is there money now going into the research and we're finding things out about it?
Absolutely. And, and before I talk about that, I just wanted to say, Todd, that what you were experiencing there, in that busy train, in that stimulated environment, that is what a lot of people are experiencing in busy, modern, urban lives. We are, confounded by stimulation that our brains cannot compute. They cannot cope with it. The noise, the sound, the sights, the smells, the people. It creates a physiological response, that physiological, feelings of anxiety, the racing heart, the knots in the tummy, not being able to think clearly, not being able to process your thoughts or make a decision. And what does society or life tell us to do? Just get on with it. That's quite often. We just have to know we've got to go to work. We've got to, do things for our children. We need to see our friends. We need to travel to see our parents. So many competing demands that we're trying to manage in these urban, busy, modern lives. And what you said when you came here to Pensford Field is exactly what we're trying to encourage people to notice. Because I think instinctively, most people will say that when they visit a natural space, they, on reflection or in the moment, they notice two things going on. They notice that they feel calmer and more relaxed. So anxiety, even low-level anxiety, is settled a little bit. And they also noticed that their mood is boosted. So they start to feel, people talk about feeling more energized or more creative, more inspired. People also talk about being able to think more clearly and process thoughts. So people instinctively know that nature is good for them, but we don't always make that link. So nature wouldn't be the first thing we would reach for if we're feeling anxious or low. The first thing that we might reach for are, psychological therapy, medication, but also some some parts of our lives that are maybe not always helpful. We might have a glass of wine, which great, it settles our anxiety for a little bit, but then it can make us feel sleepy and disengaged. When actually a lot of the time what we want to do is feel calm and relaxed, but boosted in our energy and mood at the same time. So instinctively, we know that, I think, but instinct isn't always enough to influence behaviour, and behaviour at an individual level in terms of what we do to look after ourselves, but behaviour at a wider societal, political level in terms of how we look after or manage mental health and well-being. What we need is hard evidence. That's what influences policy. That's what influenced, for example, the birth of the NICE guidelines, which are the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. They have these guidelines that have been published that tell professionals and individuals how certain difficulties should be treated, physical and emotional. And so in those NICE guidelines, you have a list, what happens if somebody presents with depression or anxiety, and it tells you how to treat depression and anxiety based on the evidence that's out there. And obviously in the NICE guidelines, the evidence is psychological therapy and pharmacological interventions, because that's what we have the evidence for. But just because we have the evidence for that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right way to manage difficulties or the only way. But the good news is, to answer your question about the kind of evidence that we have now, the good news is that we do have hard evidence that supports the impact of nature on our mental health and well-being. And we've been gathering that evidence in the past 20 to 30 years.
Just as we're getting into building an evidence base for the beneficial effects of nature, we had a helicopter, of all things, begin to circle overhead for about 5 minutes. We decided to head inside instead to continue our conversation. I started telling Georgina about how I'm feeling in the winter season. I mean, who better than a psychologist to talk to about this? I've had a few significant changes in my life, and I've not managed to keep up with my usual healthy routine. A long story short, I'm hitting the snooze button a lot more often. I know the hours of sunlight in a day has something to do with this change in my behaviour, but I've also noticed I'm spending a lot less time in nature. I wondered what would happen if I chose a brisk 20-minute walk in the woods or a swim in the sea, rather than 20 minutes of beautiful pillow cuddling time. Let's find out what she has to say.
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's a question that I really like to answer. It's because I really do enjoy telling people about the science. I think it's quite motivating for people to hear about how stepping outside of your four walls, getting out and going under a sky rather than a ceiling, which is like a Siberian tiger to our brains, it activates that fight, flight, freeze response. I like telling people that it is important to get out because of the huge benefits to our brains and our bodies and our minds that being in natural environments has. So there's been a lot of research about this in the last kind of 20 to 30 years. Scientists have really become interested in what is going on in our brains and our bodies when we are in natural environments versus urban environments or versus inside, and also what it is that is in nature that is bringing those changes to come about. So firstly, in terms of what is going on, some of the research studies have noticed the impact that being outside has on what's called our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system is basically our stress response system. That's the system that's responsible for detecting and responding to threat, whether that's physical threat or emotional threat. And it's the system that brings about a lot of symptoms of anxiety and panic. So if, for example, Todd, I'll give you a very simple example. If you were, say, on holiday or in Cornwall and you're swimming in the sea and you see a fin in the water, how could you imagine that you might feel?
I would love to say, oh wow, a cute shark, but I'd probably panic.
I think you probably would. And what could you imagine you might do?
Either freeze or swim away.
Yeah. And would you think about that? Would you think, oh, there's a fin there, I wonder what that is? Oh, I've seen programs about sharks, perhaps it could be a shark. Sharks are dangerous, I need to swim away. Would you kind of go through that thought process in your mind?
No, it's going to be
it's
hit
instant.
the water, go.
It's instant, yeah. That is our primitive stress response system. It is designed to respond quickly, to react without thought, because that system has been there it's there to ensure our survival, both in terms of evolution as a species and individually. So when your brain detects a threat, it might not be a shark in our everyday modern lives, but it could be, you're crossing a road and a car comes whizzing round the bend and you instantly step back so that you protect yourself from that car. But more often than that, it's quite a lot of emotional threats that people experience. So it can be feeling of overwhelm, a lot of things to do. People talk about anxiety in social situations, feeling worried about what people are saying about them, what people are thinking about them, judgment. It can be worry about university work or other types of work. Am I good enough? Am I keeping up with it? So these are real emotional threats that trigger off that stress response system in the same way that the physical threats will. What happens when that system is activated is your brain floods your body with hormones, stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, because it's trying to get your body to prepare to act in response to that threat. That's where you feel those anxiety symptoms. So, for example, your heart starts racing because it's trying to get blood round your muscles, to get oxygen to your muscles, to prepare your muscles to respond quicker. People talk about feeling as though they can't catch a thought. They feel confused when they're anxious. They can't make a decision. Some people talk about kind of not feeling there, like an out-of-body experience. And that's because the cortex, the top part of your brain, shuts down when you're feeling anxious, because you don't need that. You only need the part of your brain that's responsible for the stress response system. So when that system is activated, it triggers off this fight, flight or freeze response. Most people have heard about that. We kind of run away, we fight, or we freeze. We can't do anything. But what we know and what the evidence shows and what researchers shows is that when we go out into natural spaces, when we step outside, actually that autonomic nervous system changes. So our sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze system, that settles and it activates our parasympathetic system, which is our rest and digest system. That's the system that allows us to feel rested, to digest our food, to not have stomach problems, for our muscles to not feel so tense and to feel calmer and relaxed. Those systems work in polar opposite. So when people are going outside, when they're stepping outside, and more so when they're engaging with the natural world, so really paying attention, immersing with all of our senses, it has that effect of settling our anxiety, of helping us to feel calmer. Another thing that happens that, again, I think is really important that people are aware of is that when we're in nature, we're surrounded by what's called fractal patterns. And fractal patterns are self-repeating patterns in nature that are similar but not the same. And they're everywhere. You can see them in the patterns in plants, in leaves, in coastlines, in riverbeds, in clouds, in the sky. And our brains really like to view fractal patterns. Evidence shows that when we view fractals, our brain responds by releasing more alpha waves. Alpha waves help us to feel in what's called a wakefully relaxed state. So that's a state in which we can feel awake, alert, inspired, motivated, energized, but calm and relaxed at the same time. And that's a great way to be, because actually most people want to feel calm and relaxed, but also have enough energy to do what they need to do throughout the day.
And to be inspired. And
to be inspired and creative, absolutely. And nature will do that. A lot of people will, take, medication because that has a similar effect. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely a place for medication. But medication can't get that balance right. If you're feeling anxious, for example, it tries to kind of settle your anxiety, but people can then talk about feeling a bit flat or as though they don't have as much energy. Whereas alpha waves, natural kind of alpha waves, will do both.
And so is there a kind of amount of time that someone should spend in nature to get these benefits? Like, does 5 minutes of walking through a forest help with that? Or if you're in a city and you're in a park, like how much time would you have to spend in nature?
There's an interesting research study actually that looked at the effects of people who had after their working day. It looked at kind of stress relief after a working day. And after a long working day, they put people in either an urban space, a city space, a park, so kind of like an urban park, or a forest. And it took a lot of measures, psychological measures, physiological measures, to look at kind of the stress relief and how stress settled.
So this would be like blood pressure, heart rate?
Blood pressure, heart rate, levels of cortisol. Yeah, those were the physiological measures. And that study, and other studies have shown the same thing, shows that invariably when you are in either in a park or a forest environment versus a city, your stress levels come down much more so than if you're in a park or a city. And this one research paper looked at actually how spending 15 minutes started to bring that system down. So the heart rate started to drop, blood pressure, stress levels, and people talked about feeling calmer, relaxed, more able to pay attention as well and focus. Sort of people talked about having a clearer mind. So to start with, I would say 15 minutes a day is really important. And really for people, it's about making it accessible and doable and integrating that into daily life. So people can start their day, for example, by taking their morning cup of tea or coffee outside. They can end their day by taking a walk or sitting in a nearby green space and try and bring their stress response systems down. During break times, if people are working or at university, it's really important to step out into natural spaces rather than do what I think we all have a tendency towards, which is to carry on working or to check our phones or to go on screens or to maybe even visit a residential road and kind of tick a few things off our to-do list to get some shopping, get things for the evening, get some birthday cards, because we are all busy and we try to maximise every scrap of time that we have. But it's counterproductive because what we're doing is putting too much pressure on our brains, on our stress systems that weren't primed to spend all this time in busy urbanised environments. We evolved from nature. Our brains, our bodies want to be in nature. It feels calm and settled when we're in nature, and we need to integrate it back into our daily lives.
So we need to make a ritual of nature.
Yeah. And I think most people respond well to habits, to building habits into daily life. So building it into that routine. But really, it is just about getting under a sky, not a ceiling, and then you are in nature. You hear birds, you see trees, you see clouds, you hear some natural sounds rather than city sounds. And wherever possible, if people can at weekends or when they've got more time, go into more green spaces and spend even more time in green spaces, then they're going to have an even greater effect then.
And is there a kind of a residual? So if you went to a green space for 3 hours on a weekend, does the benefits of that kind of carry over into the week?
Yeah, there have been some studies that have looked at, in particular, the impact of going into sort of forest spaces, which when you're surrounded by trees. They've looked at the impact of going into a forest, say, for 2 hours at a weekend and how long the effects of that might last for. And some researchers' studies have shown that the effects if you go for 2 hours over a weekend can last for a month or so. But I would say that actually that has an impact on some parts of the system, but not all. If you then just do that for 2 hours of a weekend once a month, your stress levels are going to increase when you go back into the life that you are leading, and they're not going to stay that way.
Plants in particular, obviously with the Eden Project, I'm surrounded by plants every single day, and there's a really cool term that you've told me about that you get from spending time with plants. What is that term? Tell us what effect it has on us.
Yeah, that's it's called phytoncides. So plants and trees secrete into the environment phytoncides, which are a natural occurring chemical compound that the trees and plants have evolved to secrete to protect them from threat. So threats of fungi, disease, predators. But research has shown that when we breathe in phytoncides, there have been a number of studies that have shown a number of different positive effects. Studies have shown that our sleep can improve, that we report in psychological measures improved kind of well-being, less stress. But in terms of our physiology, fight and size boost the number of natural killer cells that we have in our bodies. Now, natural killer cells are white blood cells responsible for immune system functioning. So that's very important for our physical health. So I always say to people that, a lot of people like to be near to the sea or like sort of big open green spaces. And that's lovely. And we'll get a lot of benefits. We get the alpha waves, from that. We get the settling of our autonomic nervous system, but we don't get fight and size. So I always tell people to build in trees and plants into their lives to make sure we get those fight and size and boost our natural killer cells, both for our mental and our physical health.
So trees, plants, crucial for us.
Absolutely. And put them in your homes as well. You'll get them from your plants in your homes.
Fantastic. Houseplant revolution.
Yeah.
That's what we need. So there's one more study that the listeners might be really interested in. And I remember when I did my social psychology degree, this study by Kaplan and Kaplan blew my mind. I was very excited about it, but maybe I'm a little bit of a nerd. But you, like me, love psychology. You probably love this study. Do you want to share it with the listeners?
Yeah, I think there's a bulk of research out there that looks at something that Kaplan and Kaplan developed called the attention restoration theory. And I think this is really interesting actually for people when they come to Dose of Nature and when they're thinking about integrating Dose of Nature into their daily life, because this research talks about how nature has this restorative purpose. So it talks about how when we step outside into nature, because what we view in nature is something that's often referred to as soft fascination, our brains find nature interesting and stimulating enough to stay awake and alert, but not so overstimulating that it gets tired. So what this theory talks about is that actually for our attention, for our concentration, it's really important to step outside into the natural space, to give your brains a break from what you're doing, but also to enable it to stay awake and alert, so that when you then go back to doing what you were doing beforehand, you can pay more attention to that, you can concentrate more, you can focus more. So I think that's when people talk to me about finding it difficult to take a break from their work or from their studies, I often talk to them about that theory, because actually the research shows that not taking a break outside in nature is counterproductive. You're not going to be able to concentrate on tasks as much. You're not going to be able to focus because your brain just gets tired. But nature will restore. It will restore enough for you to go back to what you were doing.
I think this will be fantastic for one of my friends who is studying in London, and he says he stays in the library until midnight. And wakes up the next morning, 8-9 o'clock, straight back in the library. And I'm always telling them, 6 hours of studying a day, but get yourself back out into nature.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a limit in so much, in how much our brains can give to what's called focused attention. So how much you can actually focus your brains and your minds to a particular task. There's a limit to that. Whereas kind of, attention where you're not having to actively do it. So you're not actually actively paying attention. So when you step out into natural spaces, your brain is paying attention to what's around you, but you're not really trying to enable it to pay attention. That is endless. That is endless, and it will enable that rest to allow you to go back to what you were doing. Yeah, so it's really important that people know that.
I just wanted to recap on why Kaplan and Kaplan's study had such an impact on me. It's because I discovered it while I was studying. I was knee-deep in the library most days, and I'd just come across some research that I could practice straight away. In other words, this was an evidence-based exit from the library. I prioritised a morning, afternoon and evening walk or run for at least 30 minutes, and incorporated some kind of plant encounter within it. It could be argued that I studied harder, but what I saw was the attention restoration theory having an effect, as my creativity, attention span and grades all improved. It was anecdotal, but nature worked for me. Hopefully it can work for you too. So say I'm living in the city of London, or a city somewhere within the UK or around the world, and I can get to a park pretty easily. I might not be able to get to a forest fairly easy, and I'm hearing about the science. I think it's incredible. How else could I get into nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think we are creatures of habit. I think the way that our lives have been set up, especially over the past, probably 40 or so years, is that we spend so much time inside. We have very, very busy modern lives. And how do people integrate nature? How do people get nature into those busy modern lives is a really good question. And I think one that needs to be answered in the most simplistic of way, because we're not going to change habits if we feel that we have to go for a walk for an hour every single day or for 3 hours at a weekend, because our lives might not allow us to do that. So it is about making small changes to make sure that we get nature daily. So very simple changes like taking a morning cup of tea or coffee outside under a sky rather than a ceiling. At the end of a day, whether you pick up your children from school or whether you finish university or college, or when you finished work, or if you're not working, just try and get 15 minutes outside in a nearby park. Just go into that park and be in nature, preferably alone, if you can. Without screens, without even a book sometimes, without listening to music, without kind of, ticking off your to-do list or talking to somebody on the phone. Just 15 minutes of space just to be in nature and really just to sit or walk and notice what's around you with all of your senses. So pay attention to what you can hear, listen to the birds, what you can see, look at the different shapes around you, the trees, the plants, the changing of the seasons, the light, the colour. What can you smell? That fresh kind of dewy smell in the morning, or pick up some soil, smell the soil or the grass.
Yeah, I'm crazy about soil. At the Eden Project, I'm always telling people, be a vole for the day, dive into that soil and get dirty.
Well, that's great, Todd, because actually soil has something in it called Mycobacterium vaccae. I don't know if you've heard of this term, but that has been linked to improved cognition. So if there are times when you're feeling as though you're very intelligent and on it and you're thinking very clearly and you've been near soil, then that may be why.
It could be the connection.
It could be the connection, yeah. So yeah, get out, pay attention with all of your senses. 15 minutes a day, open the windows, listen to the birds. And when you're in nature, really just be in nature. Be in nature, have fun in nature, kick the leaves, be creative in nature, draw, paint, make a mandala, which is a circular picture out of the nature that you have around you. Bring your family, your children, your friends into nature. So meet in a coffee shop and maybe take a takeaway cup so you can get a takeaway and get out into nature. It's just finding these little ways of essentially being outside rather than inside. When you're planning a children's birthday party and it's the summer or it's not raining, try it outside. Pop up a gazebo, be outside rather than inside.
You hit the nail on the head with saying, be in nature. We are human beings. And I think a lot of us struggle to just be. We're also trying to act to be this thing or to be that thing rather than be.
Yeah, and that's a really important concept for mental health and well-being. I think a lot of people feel that they're struggling or that they're overwhelmed because of this constant pressure to be or do something else. And sometimes it can feel very uncomfortable for people just to be, because there's this kind of underlying low-level anxiety of I should be doing something else or I should be being someone else. And I think people will only ever realise the value of being by trying it out, by having moments where you're just being outside, you're not really doing anything. But you feel calm and relaxed and settled and creative, and thoughts might come into your head. They might not. You might come up with something, incredible, and set up a business on the back of it. You might have some kind of inspiration, or you might not. You might just be, and that's a very powerful place because it takes a lot of pressure away. It settles stress, and it can improve relationships as well.
And I guess nature is one thing we can always rely on, because whether it be rain or shine, waves or forest, they're always going to be there for us, just as they are. And I struggle quite a lot to just be as I am, but going to nature and seeing how it changes during the seasons, you never hear it complain. It's just there, and we can take a lot from trees and a lot from our natural environments about just being.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you pay attention to your natural environment, one of the things I often talk to people about is getting to know the natural environment. Lean against a tree, get to know a tree, find a favourite tree, kind of form a relationship, a connection with it. And it can be quite comforting in a way to know that actually, yes, you do have these plants, these trees, then this natural world that in a way mirrors human emotion. You know, it withstands storms, all weathers. It's not always, doesn't always have the best kind of roots or surroundings to grow from, but it's there, they're there, it's solid, it changes too. And it passes, the storms pass. And I think that's a great metaphor for the way that we could live our lives and try to kind of accept sometimes the passing of emotions, the changing of ourselves and our relationships.
Things are always changing.
Things are always changing, yeah. And the more we fight against that change, the more we battle against that change, the greater psychological conflict that it causes.
Yeah. So we move from abundance to maybe sometimes feeling like we don't have anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as the seasons change.
Yeah.
So right now we're sitting in this really nice studio. I like it in here. There's quite a nice vibe. I feel like we've brought into the studio, maybe bringing the nature in with us. And outside I can see Pensford Field. There's a tennis club just next to us as well. And there's currently a knitting session going on in the outdoors with all the hot water bottles and blankets and so on. That's beautiful. This is what Dose of Nature does. Brings people together, helps them maybe with their mental health problems, using nature as the vehicle, at least from my understanding. When did Dose of Nature start? How do you guys get funding? How do you show your outcome measures? Things like this, which I suppose you have to show to get funding.
Yeah,
tell me all about it.
Yeah.
Dose of Nature.
Dose of Nature. Big question, lots to say. So Dose of Nature started in 2019. It was formed by, I think I mentioned earlier, my colleague and friend, Dr Alison Greenwood, who had worked in the NHS, but was really finding herself feeling quite restricted in the way that when you're working at the NHS, that you work with mental health difficulties. You know, you can't really take people outside often. There isn't a lot of freedom. So she set up this charity, and I joined 18 months ago to support her as a second psychologist and to roll our programme out to children and young people. So what do we do here? So at Dose of Nature, we have two aims. What we want to do is to support people with mental health and wellbeing. So people are referred by their GPs, you know, who are struggling with a wide range of mental health difficulties, from kind of low to moderate levels of stress, anxiety, depression, to more severe difficulties like, psychosis or trauma. So we've got a wide range of difficulties that we see across the spectrum of people who are referred by their GP. And we support them by doing two things. We want to support them to spend more time in natural spaces, firstly, and secondly, to when they're in natural spaces, to connect with nature. And that means to pay attention to nature with all of our senses, rather than, as we often do, we're just in nature, but not really paying attention to it. We might be walking through it, exercising, running or cycling through it, talking to a friend through it, listening to music or a podcast through nature. So we aim to do those two things because of the huge benefits to mental health and wellbeing that nature has on our brains and our bodies and our minds, which isn't really well known or isn't really thought about as being an intervention that could help with mental health and wellbeing. So what we've done is, people instinctively know that nature's good for us, but what we've done is put a programme around that. It's a psychologically informed and psychologically led programme. So when people are referred by their GPs, they are seen by a psychologist for an assessment, and they then go on an 8-week programme in which they're paired with a Dose of Nature guide, a volunteer, somebody who we train, and who support that person to spend once a week in nature for 1 hour for that week for 8 weeks. And they support them to really get to know the natural world. Yeah. So they might talk to them about the science, they might talk to them about how to integrate nature into daily lives. And they will do lots of activities and exercises with somebody in nature to support them with that connection.
And the background of this guide, they can be anyone? Do they have to have certain skills or? Mm-hmm.
No, so we've got people who are Dose of Nature guides from all different walks of life. I mean, obviously people who are compassionate, who want to support others, who are struggling with a difficulty in their life at that time. Often that attracts a certain type of person who wants to help other people anyway. But yeah, we have people from all different walks of life volunteering for us, which is the beauty of the programme, because of course we have people from all different walks of life who are referred to us by their GPs, and we try to match people based upon the hope that they would connect over something, whether it be a mutual hobby or interest or phase of life. Yeah. But alongside the individual programme, we do have this lovely group element to our programme. So once people are part of the Dose of Nature community, they have access to a wide range of groups that span throughout the week: walking groups, knit and natter, tennis, arts in nature, there's creative writing in nature. In the summer months, we have yoga in nature. We've got a nature journaling group just starting. And those groups are open-ended. So a lot of NHS interventions end at a fixed point after the client has seen somebody for a certain number of sessions. But people have been coming to our groups for 2-3 years since Dose of Nature started, because it's part of their life. It's part of their, I would say, part of their self-care now. They've found an interest in something. They like being outside, and that opportunity to connect with other people in the community is really just positive and uplifting as well.
And so is Dose of Nature alone? Are there other places that are like this?
So Dose of Nature, our main hub is in Kew, but we have just had funding to set up a Kew in Surrey, a hub in Surrey. So we are in that process of setting up a Dose of Nature hub at a beautiful National Trust site of Dapdune Wharf. We've generated our first referrals there. We've got an operations manager looking after the hub there. So we're kind of fairly small at the moment. But I think that's what we want to be. I think it's really important that each hub is very community-based, that the people who run the hub, the people that look after the hub are local, that know the area, that have connections, and that really then put their heart and soul into it. Because it really is about community.
Community,
yeah,
absolutely. That's
really important. Community, the community come to the hub, people who are referred by their GP, the community volunteer, and the community are the employees as well.
Say I'm from a different region of the country, and I've heard this podcast, hear you talking about the nature benefits, and I go to my GP and I'm suffering from some mental health difficulties. I want to be prescribed a dose of nature. I want my doctor to give me a dose of nature. How would I get that if I'm not in the Richmond local area?
Yeah. So I guess, obviously Kew, we cover Richmond and Kingston. Surrey, we'll be covering North Guildford. How do you get it in other areas? So in the past kind of 10 or so years, the government have started to invest some funding, pockets of funding, into what's called green social prescribing. So there was a paper published in 2011, Michael Gove's environmental plan paper, and chapter 3 of that paper focused on connecting people to nature for the benefits of their mental health and well-being. On the back of that, the government have invested 7 million into setting up 7 test and learn sites across the country. Now, the idea behind those sites is that in specific areas of the country, money is being invested into green prescribing, so people can have access to green initiatives for mental health and well-being. And those sites will be gathering data to then feed back into the government, and hopefully we will then generate positive data for further investment into these types of initiatives. So I think it really does depend on what is available in your local area, and that is a problem. There are initiatives, go to your GP, look at what's around. There are often gardening projects, conservation projects. Sometimes there's kind of wild swim projects, or other kind of rowing or canoeing based initiatives. So there will be something going on that is outside in nature, but what is available very much depends on the area. And what we would like to see at Dose of Nature is actually nature-based initiatives really being embedded into a central treatment for mental health and well-being. So in NICE guidelines that I mentioned earlier, in NICE guidelines, GPs are aware of this, society, the population are aware of this, and people are provided with those interventions as a first-line intervention, just as they are in Japan, which is a very interesting, concept. In Japan, people who go to their GPs with stress or mental health difficulties, the first-line intervention is to send people to kind of forest bathing, Shinrin-yoka initiatives. So green initiatives, the first-line intervention, because of the evidence base for that. And we would like the same to happen, across the UK and across more Western countries. But it is going to require a shift. It's going to require a shift in thinking in the public, and a shift in thinking, at a wider organisational level, amongst GPs, amongst professionals, amongst politicians. But I do believe that people can create that shift, hopefully by creating awareness. If people start to ask for this, people start to recognise that this is beneficial, then that is when, politicians, when government, when GPs take notice.
Yeah, because you wonder how often people will notice that their mental health is maybe deteriorating and they just take themselves out into nature and maybe they treat themselves and it isn't recorded. And maybe they aren't the greatest advocate and they don't want to, bang on number 10 and say we need more green initiatives out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for some people it may seem like it's a bit, hippy-dippy or a bit wishy-washy. Just what going into nature is going to help with, with your depression or anxiety. People may not believe that because the message, the rhetoric out there is that no, you need psychological therapy or you need a medication. But actually, it's not hippy-dippy, it's not wishy-washy. There is hard evidence, there is physiological and psychological hard evidence that shows that nature will improve mental health and well-being. And actually, if we don't use nature to improve mental health and well-being, then we are just going to wastelessly pour more and more money into NHS initiatives, into medication, into psychological therapies, into mental health programs that are already out there but are not working because, let's face it, mental health is getting worse.
Yeah. There's one piece of evidence, probably the most famous study that nature therapists will draw on. Do you want to tell people about that? The hospital window study?
Yes, yeah. So this is a study that was it was a pioneering study really, because it was the first study that sort of found this link between the natural world and well-being, and from there generated a lot of interest and then later signed more scientific research papers into that correlation. So this was Roger Ulrich's hospital window study. So Ulrich was very interested in that time at not nature, in fact. He was interested in aesthetics, beauty and well-being. And so what he did was, this was in 1981, he published his paper. And in the 9 years preceding that, he looked at the hospital records of patients in one particular hospital who had recovered from a gallbladder operation. He looked at the records of patients who some patients had been put in a recovery room with a window with a view of a brick wall, and some were placed in a recovery room with a room with a window overlooking trees. And he compared those recovery records. And what he found, he didn't set up this experiment, so this was retrospectively looking at records that already existed. And what he found was that for the patients who were placed in the room with a view of the trees, those patients recovered quicker, so they spent less post-surgery days in hospital. They requested fewer moderate to strong painkillers, and they made fewer negative comments to nurses around them. So that really demonstrated that the power of nature, and that was just a view of a tree. That was just a view through a window, which demonstrated the power of nature in recovery. And if you then, I guess scientists, researchers became interested because of the ramifications of that, the potential ramifications of that one research study. The implications, if nature is good for our physical health and our mental being and our recovery and our well-being, are huge, because the natural world is free, it is accessible. It's not so good for pharmaceutical companies who probably want to plug the medications, but actually it is potentially good for mental health. It's a lot cheaper than some of the interventions that were currently being offered.
And we face this time of crisis both with our mental health. There's generally just a human crisis around the world right now, but there's also a nature crisis. And I think we try and separate them. It's a human crisis and a nature crisis, but they are so interlinked. Yeah. And I think the more that we come to love and enjoy nature and realize how good it is for our mental health, the more we will want to save the natural world, to bring the natural world back to life.
Absolutely. And there's a research paper being conducted on Dose of Nature that's going to start soon over the next year, and it is going to be looking at our programme and the impact of our programme on mental health and the economics of that. But it's also going to be looking at pro-environmental behaviours. So what we do find anecdotally is that a lot of people who have engaged in our programme then become much more pro-environmental, and they start to do little behavioural changes that look after the environment. So if people have got gardens, they start to plant more. They're interested in putting in plants that encourage bees and butterflies and other wildlife. People pick up litter when they see it. They want to look after the environment around them. They want to educate their children or their families into the importance of the natural world. And all of a sudden you create this kind of catalytic effect of slow, steady change, whereby we are more integrated and we want to look after our natural world. And yes, so whilst we can have this big change in terms of, looking after our planet from a policy level, which we absolutely need, and we absolutely need that for mental health as well, we need it from a smaller scale as well. We all have our individual role to play in making this planet a better, more integrated place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Any final words?
No, I think, I think one other thing that I just wanted to say was that actually this is, in relation to what we were talking about, is that this is also important for urban planning, for when people we're needing to build more houses all the time, developments are going on all the time. And this research, this evidence is really important because we need to make sure that there are green spaces are provided for people, parks, trees, accessible for children, for adults. It's really important. And if you've ever, visit Wales quite a lot, which is where my husband is from, and I noticed a very stark difference between, there's a couple of different housing estates there. One doesn't have very much nature at all. There is not a lot of trees. There's a park, but not a lot of trees. The other has a lot of trees. And I was interested in why that was when they were so close to each other. And it was explained to me that the housing development, with the built up with a lot of the trees, there's a lady who owned that land, or a family who owned that land. And when she sold that land for development, she sold it for less money, with a caveat that built into the planning would be trees. Wow. So she made sure, she took less money for that land, but made sure that trees would be built and provided for the residents. And when I was walking through both environments, noticing a huge difference to how I was feeling in that environment. And now imagine, you're living in these environments. So people can play a role. It
goes to show that activism doesn't have to be out on the streets, waving a sign around and demanding change through petitions. You can do activism in the way that this lady did. Yeah. And the legacy you can leave can benefit people for years and years after you're gone. Absolutely.
And there are, obviously this is very specific to people who have enough money to own that land, but there are people out there who own land, who sell land, and they can play a part in changing the landscape. And should play a part in changing the landscape, because there's only so much money that we all need.
Yeah, and we all live on this earth together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for chatting to us about Dose of Nature.
Thank you.
And all your knowledge. Thank you for sharing it.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
There we have it. A strong evidence base for nature therapy. But what did you think of that? We skimmed only the surface of the research that's available to us on the beneficial effects of nature. If you want to take a deep dive further into this topic, please check out Dose of Nature's website, which summarises the research and provides links to much greater depths. One thing that I realised during this episode is that the time you spend in nature builds up your love and desire to care for it, and in return, nature gives you back present, attentive and relaxed time. I think of this place near Newcastle that always felt like it had so many different environments with so much diversity in each one. As you walk through a woodland with a steep hill, you've got to pass under a railway bridge and onto an open grassland surrounded by ponds, before walking about half a mile to reach a row of gorse bushes sitting in front of a river. It had everything. Nowadays this is mostly appreciated by dog walkers, but in the past it's been used as a military training ground with trenches dug into the grassland area, though nature has since grown over them. And the ponds were used as a place to play curling, and there used to be a river crossing and a place to launch boats here as well. And it makes me think of all the people who have walked through here and probably sat on my favourite boulder to appreciate the sunset and contemplate their life, just like I do today. How many people have fallen in love here, started friendships, or calmed down after being angry? Nature becomes this safe space for us to go to feel emotions and to try to understand our thoughts. It's always there, and often feels like the right place. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I want to get out under a canopy, onto a coastline, or on a moor of some sort, at least once a day, if I can. Failing that, find a local park, and enjoy the birds. This episode, it also made me realise that as individuals and as a society, we need to trust in what has existed for a long time. We need to invest in what already exists, to spend time and resources on preserving this planet. And by that, I mean your local woods, your local pond, your local playground. You might not change the world, but you will help to change the world of the people who come to spend time in those natural spaces. In the next episode, we're continuing on that thought of urban planning. But this time, we're not looking at anything. We're listening. How often do we pay attention to soundscapes? We're delving into the world of natural, virtual and anthropogenic soundscapes with PhD fellow Alex Smalley. He was part of the fantastic BBC audio series Forest 404, which will make for a great listen before the next episode. For Conversations in the Canopy and for People, Plants and Planet, I've been Todd.